Hello, Mike.
Hello, Mohit. How are you?
Good, my friend. Good to see you again. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well.
Excellent. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I can see a lot of people coming in here. Hello. Oh, wow. Oh, so Bully is here. Welcome, Bully. Welcome, Ashok. Welcome, Pari. Welcome, Sumit. Welcome. This is lovely. Grant, my friend. How are you doing? Deepak, good to see you.
It's nice to see some of the same names as before. That means we're not putting people off each week.
Yes. Oh, I must warn everyone that today is going to be a long drawn session. So if you've got if you think that it's just a quick one, it won't be. So I suggest you go get yourself a cold beer or a cup of coffee, so you can sit here and then listen to Mike, because Mike, you got a long presentation today. That's fantastic. Absolutely brilliant.
When we've been putting these together, and Salil in particular has been gathering lots of photos, we've been putting them together, and then I've been going through and we've been removing a few. And then we're going through this one, I can need to remove quite a few. And look, these birds are just too good. They're like such fantastic.
Yes.
So we've got more than we've had before. So I think it's time to before we start, anyone can go off and get themselves a rice beer and
yes. Fantastic. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our Thursday evening, Made Birding Easy webinars. This is what we're doing every Thursday, taking people to for these virtual journeys. And I've been asked by my office that I talk a bit too much. So today I will not. I will get on with my job. My job is to introduce Mike and myself and the goal of this webinar. So let me quickly tell you. The goal of this webinar is to it's not just about bringing these virtual journeys or rare species or these hotspots where you can travel to. It's also got possibilities of conservation, bird conservation, wildlife conservation, rural empowerment, and to help new birders, advanced birders, about eBird techniques, best practices, and ecotourism, photography, all of that. So you can look at it the way you want to, and make use of this information while it's there. And I'm also creating possibilities for NGOs that I'm closely associated with, like Wildlife Trust of India, to come up with their projects, and then check if there's any possibility of raising funds for their projects, like we did for white-winged duck. And a very dear friend of ours from Worcester has come up today and said that he's going to try and offer support. So that's really heartening. There's huge amount of power in these virtual webinars, where you don't have to go anywhere and I don't have to go anywhere, and we can still be transported into this dream world of ours for the time being. Physically, of course, we all want to be there. And okay, so this was the goal of this particular webinar. And let me start with introducing Mike right away. So Mike, I'm going to repeat what I did last time, but this is very interesting. Those who don't know you enough should know. Ever since his childhood in England, Mike has been fascinated with watching birds and recording and documenting bird sightings. Mike lived in Delhi in the year 2002. He was a very active member of Delhi Bird Club and also contributed to the Atlas of Birds of Delhi and Haryana. And then he moved to Bangalore, and he got interested in exploring sites that weren't visited so frequently. He worked for Bird Count India to help promote Indian birding, and especially high quality data recording. He's also an eBird reviewer for India. His interest in bird recording and migration led to a short-term assignment of running the BTO's Bird Track program. Each week, he would check the BBC weather pages to find out what the weather had been like in Britain, so he could write an article discussing the recent bird occurrences. Okay, I've been asked not to speak too much, so a quick introduction about me. I'm Mohit Aggarwal. I'm blessed with 4 children, a son and a daughter, and 2 non-humans. One is a Labrador and the other one is escapee African Grey. I'm also a follower of Shiva. Professionally, I'm an experiential ecotourism specialist with deep love for nature. I help people travel to some wonderful places in Asia. I'm the founder of Asian Adventures, a 26-year-old company. It is the largest and #1 bird watching tour company in India. The company is on a large mission to help the Asian elephant with their corridors, with WTI, free the Himalayas of plastic waste and help small wildlife NGOs, and also save the ancient Himalayan shrines. My interest is to promote ecotourism in its true essence and convert every tourist to an ecotourist. So that was about me. Now over to you, Mike, but just check if everyone is being able to hear you. If everybody can hear me and you, could you just type in the chat why? So yes or why, so that we know that everybody is okay with that.
You can hear me okay, because I'm going to be the one who's nattering most now.
So I can hear you very well, I guess.
No one said yes yet.
Okay.
Okay, there. No, that's enough.
Okay.
That's
okay. Good.
So,
Okay, so Mike, over to you.
Yep, right. We'll get started. Not much introduction from me. I've already said that this is a bit of a longer one, so we'll start straight away. And we're visiting Arunachal Pradesh this week, which really should be a dream for any birder worldwide. It's just such a fantastic area to go birding. Of course, we're in the Eastern Himalayas. So the Eastern Himalayas through Nepal, through Bhutan, Tibet, Northern Myanmar is a fantastic biodiversity hotspot. There was this recent review done looking at just globally threatened birds. It's 45, or wildlife generally, 45 species of mammals globally threatened, 50 species of birds, many others. But the actual total diversity is enormous. I think there's something like 10,000 plants, more than 300 mammals, nearly 1,000 species of birds in the Eastern Himalayas. And the majority of this is found in Northeast India, and the majority of that is found in Arunachal. So Arunachal itself, it is known as, actually Arunachal means the land of the rising sun. It's the furthest north and furthest east in India, so you have to get up pretty early in the morning. But it doesn't mean you get to bed fairly early. It was dark by sort of 5, 6 o'clock. Anyway, it's exceptionally diverse. It's a really heavily forested state. It's the least populous state in India. It's interesting, it's actually only opened up in fairly recent years. So 1992 was when it opened up for foreigners to be able to visit. So there's been relatively little exploration in Arunachal. Worth noting as well that China don't recognize Arunachal as a part of India, and invaded India in 1962. And since then, well, what you notice in Arunachal, you notice heavy military presence along the borders, but since then it's been relatively calm and it's nice and safe to travel. So a quick look at Arunachal. Well, there we are, right in the very northeast of India, as you can see. So you have Bhutan to the west, you have Tibet to the north, and you have Myanmar to the east. Arunachal itself, just the main point just from this map, which I know you can't read, but is you'll notice the rivers that run through here. So you've got the Brahmaputra that runs through Assam and south, but then most of Arunachal has these large rivers that run north-south, so from the Himalayas down into the Brahmaputra. And the state itself is quite inaccessible. The ways to access the state are really along these rivers. So these deep valleys that run from the north to the south. In the west side, that first tributary you can see, has its old name here, but that's the Kameng River that runs up by Eagle Nest. And on the east or the northeast, you see the Dibang River. That's the one that runs up through the Mishmi Hills. In the center there, including the Siang and the Subansiri, are relatively unexplored. We're not going to go birding there tonight. Not too many people have been, so there's still plenty of scope for exploring in Arunachal. To also note that this is a huge elevation range as well, because in the south, the border is the plains of Assam, yet the highest peak just on the Tibet border is 7,000 meters. So it's a fantastic range. And just to show where we are, it's emphasizing the fact that we're doing the western side. So Eagle Nest, which will be familiar to some of you, I'm sure, and various sites in that area, which is running along the western border of Arunachal and the eastern border of Bhutan. And then we'll race across to Mishmi Hills, which is in the east and northeast, and go up that valley. And then we'll finish with a spell in Namdapha, which is on the eastern side, very close to the Myanmar border. So there's a few main sites we're unfortunately not visiting today, but there's just too much to do. So Arunachal, the main tourist site known is the Twang Monastery. So if you keep going up Eagle Nest and you go over the Sela Pass, where we will a little bit later today, you get to Twang, which is, this is actually the second largest monastery in the world. And this is the area that was invaded by China in 1962. Arunachal is full of various tribes, different ethnic groups, Tibetan, some from Myanmar, lots of distinctive dress, lots of distinctive customs. And of course, food. So this is one side dish that's quite common, bamboo shoots with chili here. So most of the food is very heavily rice oriented. Not very spicy, don't use too many spices. This is a bamboo shoot with chili. This is wongwat nam, I think you pronounce it. This is a chicken dish. The chicken is coated with rice flour, so like toasted rice that's in ground to a powder or to a flour and mixed with some local herbs and spices. And kuat pita. This is a sweet, this is a dessert, this is banana fritters, again fried in rice flour. But anyway, enough of the food, we'll have some more later. Eagle Nest Wildlife Sanctuary. So Eagle Nest is a place probably most of you have heard of. I'd say it probably is the most important birding site, the most amazing birding site in the Eastern Himalayas of India, certainly. There's a few reasons for this. A lot of variation in the habitat. So a lot of it is cloud forest, temperate forest, but there's dense bamboo in patches, there's large patches of evergreen, and it goes across this wide altitudinal range that we talked about in Arunachal. And there are some great birds to go to. What's also interesting about Eagle Nest is that it's very heavily community-led, the ecotourism around there. It's famous, as you'll know, for Bougainvillea Shikla, which I'll talk about more later. But this sort of started in 1995 when there was a birder, ecologist, Ramana Athria, was birding there because he'd been told it was a nice place to go when his wife was working somewhere up in Arunachal. And he saw a pair of birds that he didn't really recognize, sort of laughing thrushes or something like that. But that was 1995 anyway. But he recognized the potential of the area generally for wildlife. And he started a few years later, in the early 2000s, something called the Eagle Nest Biodiversity Project. And that was aimed at documenting a lot of the wildlife here, but also looking whether this could be set up as an ecotourism venture, whether we could encourage sustainable tourism for bird watchers and other wildlife lovers to come here. So the land here is typically owned by the community and then shared between individual members of the community. So there was a camp set up by one guy on his land, and that became Lama Camp, which we'll talk about or visit in a little while, named after the Dalai Lama, the current Dalai Lama, who passed through Eagle Nest when he fled from Tibet in the 1950s, I think. Anyway, so there's a lot of conservation in this area. A lot of the villagers are involved in running the camps, patrolling the forests, acting as guides, and it's quite a success story from that point of view. So Eagle Nest itself, just the main point just from this map is to see that brown line that runs through the middle. And part of the reason Eagle Nest is such a fantastic place for birding is that it's accessible. So this is a road. This used to be the only road connecting Tawang that we saw earlier, which is way off to the north here, with the rest of India, basically. And after the 1962 war, the army obviously decided they needed better access here. So there was a new road built, and that old road fell into disuse. Now it's a jeep track originally, but it's reasonably wide in places. It goes through from Kelong, Doimara at the bottom here, near Assam, just at a sort of 200 or 300 meters, and it rises up through to about 3,600 meters, I think, near Lama Camp, not Savannah. But it gives you good access through the forest, all these elevational ranges, and that's one of the difficulties in a lot of the Northeastern Himalayas. You can't access the best forest. Well, an eagle nest you can, and you can access all elevations, and the bird life changes quite dramatically at different elevations. This is part of the view of the sanctuary. Obviously, cloud forest, a lot of rhododendron. So if you visit in April, May time, it's bright red with a lot of rhododendron around. And this is Lama Camp, dimensioned. So this is actually in quite degraded forest here. So it's quite cleared secondary forest, but it gives you a fantastic variety of birds. One of the main camps is Bompu Camp, a bit more primary forest here. But if you stay, typically when you go to eagle nest, you end up staying maybe at both these camps for 3 or 4 nights each. The bird life is quite different, and you can just walk. You're in prime birding area just from these camps. With the birding, well, I thought we better start with a typical northeastern birding, your first experience of these forests. And one of the difficulties or challenges or fun things is that there is so much species diversity. So whereas elsewhere in India, you might have 2 or 3 members of a family to worry about, here, for example, you've got 25 Philoscopus warblers. And of course, they're up in the tree and you only see them from underneath like this, and you can't really see much detail. Or when you do see them, well, they're facing away from you and you can't see any detail on them then either. Or maybe it's a silhouette against the sky, and then you still can't see anything on it. Or at the bottom right here, it's too far away in bright light, and you can't get any detail on that either. Which species was that? Okay. Oh, there's one on the right-hand side. It's got a wing bar. I can see that, but it's a bit obscured. It's moving too fast. Not sure what that one is. What's next? Oh, one at the bottom there. There's got an eye ring. Definitely see an eye ring, but that's gone as well. Now where are we? Left-hand side, another one. It's got a crown stripe, this one. Different one. What could that be? It's not showing very clearly. Oh, gone again. What do we got now? We got one at the top. Flying off. Too late. What else have we got here? Oh, there's another one in the middle on the right, flying. It's got a pale rump. I can see that, but can't really get much more on it. What we got now? Here. Oh, another one gone. Another one flying here. The one at the bottom. Definitely white in the tail on that one. What's that one? Okay. And oh, that one at the top, that's got a nice yellow rump. Oh, it's got crown stripe as well. God grief, what's that one? So it's fun birding in the Eastern Himalayas, and it's a bit overwhelming, first attempt, but you soon get used to it. And thankfully, there are a few warblers that tend to show themselves nicely, so it's not all like that. This is a grey-cheeked warbler, one of the commonest warblers that you have here. Note the really full grey hood on this bird, which is a key distinguishing feature from this fairly scarce white spectacled warbler, otherwise fairly similar, but the grey on the hood is only on the crown, doesn't come below the eye on this one. And some of the Philosopher's warblers really are pretty spectacular. This is yellow vented warbler, which is at lower elevations. It's a bird you can quite often see before you even reach eagle nest, and if you stop along the road somewhere. Can't really see the yellow vent here very well, but it's really bright yellow and black on the head. Anyway, it's not all small, difficult, fast-moving birds. There's quite a few vantage points through the forest. So this is a group who are looking out with the prayer flags, which in this case didn't actually help them because they were trying to find rufous-necked hornbill, which this is a good watch point for. Which wasn't there at this particular time. But you can see when you get some vantage points, you can see far across the forest. Otherwise, you're in quite deep forests a lot of the time. There is what they were looking for and not seeing, the rufous-necked hornbill. That's a male with the bright orange around the head, the neck, and the breast. Females are just black there. And great hornbill, not so easy to see here, but it also occurs. So one of the nice places here for watching raptors and swifts as well. You see quite a few needletails, and this raptor's mountain hawk eagle. There's various other raptors, quite a few raptors around, but a lot of the time you're in the denser forest, so you get a brief glimpse through the canopy. And if you're really lucky, when you get these little gaps and you can look over the river a bit, you might find Blythe's kingfisher. Really big bill on this, quite a dark kingfisher. This is very scarce. It's only seen in the very lower bits of eagle nest, but sometimes seen before you get there. Again, if you're traveling on the road and you stop and check streams. There's one reserve that I'm not talking about today, which is actually very good for these, is Pake Tiger Reserve, which borders eagle nests and borders Nameri, but a scarce bird in the northeast generally. So anyway, you come to eagle nest, you're probably based at Lama Camp to start with. You have to try and find a Bougainvillea cicla, don't you? It is the key bird. So how do you find them? Well, okay, it's not necessarily that easy. You can spend some time around Lama Camp looking out. Need some patience. The fog rolls in. Oh, and no luck. Fog's rolled in the afternoon. Time to give up for the day. But it's the key bird. Try again the next day. But it does involve quite a lot of waiting around. If you're lucky, you might hear it, might not see it, but it can take quite a bit of searching. So you wait around in the right area until the fog rolls in again, and that's it for another day. So this is actually my exact experience on my first trip to eagle nest. We spent 2 full days doing nothing else but spending our time in the best area for Bougainvillea cicla and failing. But never mind, you can get it, and most people with patience do. So this is a Bougainvillea cicla. It's a pretty amazingly coloured bird, and it's I talked a little bit about Ramana when he first went in 1995. It was 10 years after that first sighting that he actually got better views of the bird, and then eventually, with a few sightings, it was May 2006 when they trapped a bird and were finally able to confirm what it was. They'd realised it was a Leocicla. It's quite similar to Imaishan Leocicla, which occurs in China, but still well over 1,000 kilometers away. But it was clearly different in various ways. So 1 or 2 birds were trapped in May 2006, and it was described then as a new species to science. It was also described formally without taking a specimen, which was quite controversial at the time, because to describe a new species, it's normally insisted upon that you catch and kill a specimen to keep a specimen on record. But in all the time that Ramana had been there and the people looking, he realized that there really aren't very many of these birds, and to take a specimen would be potentially too drastic to the population. So it was described purely on the basis of photographs and a DNA sample. But so this is it. So it's a small laughing thrush. Males and females are slightly different, but they're both really brightly coloured. They have these lovely red, sort of waxy, almost like a waxwing, the red in the wing here. And they were seen generally quite close to the Lama Camp area. Since that sighting, there have been a few surveys in other areas of Western Arunachal, and they've seen a few other individuals, but no real populations anywhere else. So they really are just in this, more or less in this immediate area. And it's probably thought, the latest is that there's only maybe 10 to 20 birds at max. It really is that rare. And it's rare, but it's pretty amazing to think that a bird that brilliantly coloured was unknown until very recently. Anyway, even without Bougainvillea cicla, I think eagle nest would probably be the best place to go birding in the Eastern Himalayas, at least in India. Red-faced Leocicla is the closest relative, actually slightly more widespread, but more difficult to see in some ways because it's a bit more skulking than the Bougain. The other thing I should add, actually, is the Bougainvillea cicla is named after the local tribe. So the Bougans, most of the people who are working in this area are the Bougans. The land is owned by the Bougans. And so it was named after the tribe themselves. Beautiful Sibia is another slightly laughing thrush babbler related bird. Quite interesting that a grey bird was called beautiful by someone, but I think they appreciate the subtle sort of blue-grayness. He's actually a rather smart bird. And long-tailed civeaux, which are a bit more bold and obvious and noisy. They're also fairly common in this area. So there's lots of laughing thrushes, babblers, and the various related birds. There are lots. This is a blue-winged laughing thrush, which is quite a tricky one to actually see in the open. And the scimitar babblers, streak-breasted scimitar babbler, quite common, but it's very secretive. So a lot of these birds take some effort to see. And this is another rather nice scimitar babbler. This is coral-billed scimitar babbler. This one is actually, this is split. If you read Pamela Rasmussen's book, Birds of South Asia, she splits this as black-crowned scimitar babbler, split from Fair's scimitar babbler, which both occur in Arunachal. This one's in the western side where we are, and the other one is in the south and east of the Brahmaputra. But that split is not recognized by IOC or eBird at the moment. But there's plenty of potential for new species coming out of the northeast. There's lots of subspecific variation, and there's a lot of birds that really aren't that well researched. Rusty-fronted barwing. If you are around Lama Camp and you're trying to find the Bougainvillea cicla and you see a rusty-fronted barwing, pay close attention, because quite often Bougainvillea ciclas will hang about in small flocks of rusty-fronted barwings. So they're very often accompanying each other. And one of the smallest babblers, rufous-capped babbler. One of the ones, especially some of the small babblers, are often in mixed species flocks. So there'll be quite a few of them, several species moving through quite fast. Chestnut-tailed minler is one of the commoner small babblers. Chestnut-tailed minler, also known as bar-throated shiva, or bar-throated minler, or probably chestnut-tailed shiva, or whatever other combination of that you want. Black-chinned hyena is the smallest of the hyenas. So most of these birds as well, when you see them, you don't actually see them quite as nicely in the open and obvious like this, but they're usually in small flocks and usually mixed with other species and usually moving quite fast. So you can go through the forest not seeing anything for a few minutes and then suddenly come across a flock and you don't know where to look. You look up or down, you look at the hyenas, you look at the warblers, you look at the babblers or the laughing thrushes. And then if you're unlucky, within 20 seconds, they're gone and they've moved through. So it's an exhilarating experience trying to spot various different species in these flocks when they move through the forest here. White-naped hyena is quite a distinctive hyena that's not in such large numbers, but usually you can see them around here. And fulvetters are also known as tit babblers. So they are a small babbler, a little bit tit-like. These are very often in the mixed species flocks, and you can get quite a lot of them, maybe like 20, 30, 40 even together. One of the other fulvetters, Ludlow's fulvetter, which is also known as brown-throated fulvetter, which is a little bit more of a restricted range here. And then a really stunning one is the golden-breasted fulvetter. So another group of birds that are real targets for the keen birders out there are the Renbabblers. It must be something about the little brown jobs, the small birds that skulk, don't show themselves very well, but these are real targets. So they're mostly very low in the undergrowth, mostly stay inside, so they're in dark areas, so you can't see them very clearly. This is Eyebrowed Renbabbler, fairly obviously named for its very long supercilium, long thin supercilium. And this amazing bird is thought to be a Renbabbler before, but realized it's not actually that closely related to Renbabblers. This is a wedge-billed babbler. This is Sikkim wedge-billed babbler, also known as blackish-breasted babbler. These are also sort of low down and a bit skulking, but often in quite small flocks and move around in small groups. But Very impressive, heavy triangular bill, wedge-billed babblers have on them. So this is Sikkim wedge-billed babbler, which occurs further west, is eagle nest, and we'll see another one when we come and move a bit further east in Arunachal later. Spotted Elytura is another bird that was thought to be a small babbler, but actually they're quite distinct from babblers, and it's in its own new family of Elytura. It's a family of its own, so it's a monospecific family. There's just the one species in this family worldwide. Quite an impressive bird with spots ever and a nice song. It's a lot of these small birds, which you can't see very well, sing very loudly and have quite distinctive songs. So if you are birding here, most birds you probably find by call or song first of all, and it does help to be clued up, or at least with somebody who is clued up, because it's difficult to tease them out into the open very often. But and you can walk a long distance. You just want to hear an Elytura, and then you know where to try and concentrate to get a view of it. And this is how you get a view of it. This is typical of watching Renbabblers. You need to sort of bend down, try and find a way where you've got a view that goes back a few meters into the vegetation. And when you're in a little group like this, there's 5 of you, probably find that only one person can see the bird because it's behind leaves or branches for everyone else. But all part of the excitement of birding in the Eastern Himalayas. So parrotbills. This one is lesser rufous-headed parrotbill, now generally known as pale-billed parrotbill. Really cute selection of birds. There's several in the family that you can find in Eagle Nest and elsewhere in Arunachal. This one identification feature from this, because it's similar to the greater rufous-headed parrotbill otherwise, is the short black eyebrow this has, which makes it a pale-billed parrotbill. Unless, of course, it doesn't have the short black eyebrow, in which case it's not necessarily a greater. It might be the subspecies of lesser that doesn't have the eyebrow. Just to add a little bit of confusion for you. And 2 of the other parrotbills, these ones quite different. Black-throated on the left is tiny, and these move about in fast-moving flocks. These are really fantastic birds. And the one on the right, brown parrotbill, which is fairly scarce, doesn't tend to be in such large numbers. But both are very fond of bamboo, as many of the parrotbills are. So a lot of these dense bamboo patches are where you check thoroughly for parrotbills. And this bird is another one which taxonomists have been a bit confused about. It really is a stunning bird. Fire-tailed Myzornis, stunning bird with a stunning name as well. I must work out what Myzornis actually means. So again, it was thought to be a babbler, but it's not really a babbler. I think it's now considered as most closely related to parrotbills, although it doesn't have a bill that's anything like a parrotbill, of course. They actually feed on nectar and sap from trees, which is why they have the long, thin bill to get nectar out. It's probably resident here, but it's a bird that definitely, like most of the birds in the hills, has altitudinal movements. So you can find that at certain times of your visit, maybe you go in end of March, they might be quite common, but 2 weeks before there were none there at all. And it's just a timing which you may be lucky to catch them as they're moving up in altitude to higher areas where they breed. There's also a few good pheasants and partridges. This is chestnut-breasted partridge. Unfortunately, most of these are heard much more than they're seen. You can hear them through much of Eagle Nest, but to get a view of these birds is extremely tricky. Relies on luck more than anything else, I think. Similarly with grey peacock pheasant, which is quite regular here. Also quite regular in the lowlands, so in Assam, for example, where we were a couple of weeks back. It's another bird you'll hear quite regularly and see if you have a lot of luck. But here's another, if you've done Bougainvillea, I think this is probably number 2 on your target list, especially those who aren't so keen on the small brown Renbabblers. Ward's Trogon is pretty scarce in the northeast generally, and it seems to love these dense, dark forests full of mossy covered branches in the trees. It's got a dark forest in the clouds, and it's quite a sort of spooky area that you can get wards trogon. And they have this loud ringing call, which is their first time you come across them, really. But they're difficult to see. There clearly aren't very many wards trogons around, but really stunning colour. And the female is yellow underneath. A few other birds. This interesting short-billed woodpecker is a pale-headed woodpecker, which is a real bamboo specialist. Barred cuckoo dove, which is, cuckoo doves are pretty much half cuckoo, half dove, long tail. Again, not very easy to see. They're often seen mostly in flight. Collared owlet, you will hear and see fairly often. Collared owlet is a very small owl, but its call you'll hear a lot, but you have to be a little bit careful where you hear it. It really makes small birds go mad. And the small birds often like mobbing owls. The call of a collared owlet, almost within seconds sometimes, attracts lots of birds. Some of the warblers, some of the tits, nuthatches, tree creepers all go a bit mad to try and find this collared owlet. And it's quite fun watching these things, but it's a little bit careful. You have to be ethically here as well. It's commonly done by a lot of the guides who will play at the call of collared owlet to attract birds out, and it's incredibly successful. But there's a couple of provisos with that, of course, that it's not very sensible to play it too much, because birds do tend to go a bit mad around it. And the other thing, if there's other groups around in Eagle Nest, if you hear a collared owlet, chances are actually it's a guide from the other group playing the call and not a real one. So we make sure we keep that to a minimum, but it is it's an incredible experience to see how suddenly small birds come to mob an owl. Small birds such as this one. This is a rather stunning warbler, black-faced warbler, usually in small flocks, and it's certainly one of the birds that reacts if there is a collared owlet around. As does golden babbler, another quite stunning bird. These are often in mixed species flocks. Black-eared shrike babbler is a very small babbler. Again, stunning plumage, stunning colours. Unfortunately, quite often these are high in the canopy. Yellow-cheeked tit is relatively common around here. There are a few tree creepers. The two here, Hodgson's on the right, is very similar to the European tree creeper, and was considered a subspecies of it until a few years ago. And all on the left has also been split. Actually, that one was brown-throated tree creeper, which was split into Sikkim tree creeper and Manipur tree creeper. Often quite difficult to identify the tree creepers, but these are actually, very clearly different. Hodgson's is a really brilliant white below, and Sikkim, you can see why it used to be called brown-throated before it was split. And here is another top target for an eagle nest, beautiful nuthatch, which, if you weren't very impressed by the grey of a beautiful sibia earlier, you can't really fail to be impressed by a beautiful nuthatch. These are fairly rare. It took me a few trips before I finally saw one here, but most people with a few days do manage to see them somewhere. They'll feed on the trunks. They also like feeding in the lichen on branches. Mrs. Gould Sunbird, possibly the most spectacular of the sunbirds, of which there are several species. This particularly favours rhododendron, so it's another one to check and watch your rhododendrons for Mrs. Gould Sunbird and the Myzornis we talked about earlier. Black-throated prinia, find here around here. And bush robins, another of the skulking birds that are not so easy to get a good view of. white-browed bush robin has this fantastic, really long, thin supercilium. It's another bamboo specialist, so always worth checking bamboo carefully and low down on the bamboo. There are a few flycatchers. If you're here in the summer, this is ferruginous flycatcher, which is a summer visitor only. So they tend to arrive, I think, probably to later in April. But Eagle Nest actually it's interesting to know when is the best time to visit. Most people tend to visit end of March, early April. But the birds change quite a lot from in the spring, a little bit earlier in March through to May. And it's also a bit dependent on the weather. So I've been before in the middle of March and got rained out most days. But I've also been there when the weather's been beautiful. But if you go a little bit later, April, May, you start to get some of the summer visitors like this, quite a lot of the cuckoos. You get a lot more birds singing, so some birds are easier to see. Some of the skulkers, white-tailed robins, blue-fronted robins, things like this, not so easy if you go in February, early March time when it's still really winter and birds haven't quite reacted. But there's a lot of winter visitors here, so it's difficult to know exactly what is the best time. It is very cold, so if that's a factor, probably isn't for those of us who are watching from Europe. But you will find the camp at Lama Camp can be pretty cold at night. Long-tailed thrush, is a Zuthra thrush, is one of the nice ones here. We're going to talk about a couple of other similar-looking thrushes later. And Cochoas. So Cochoas are extremely interesting birds. These are, again, thought to be thrushes. They're fruit eaters, so I think they're sort of fruit-eating thrushes. They're quite quiet. They'll sit quite quietly, they're quite unobtrusive, not very easy to see. And they're mostly summer visitors. So again, this is a bird you need to be going a little bit later, probably later in April, early May, to stand a good chance of seeing them. I don't think anything really is known about where they winter for both species. So there are scattered winter records, but really no one knows exactly where these birds winter. It's not all birds here. There are a few good mammals at Eagle Nest as well. One you have a reasonable chance of seeing is Arunachal macaque, which is only described as a new species about 10 or 15 years ago. Capped langur is also present through here. And then if you're really lucky, and I know people who have been, there are actually several species of cats here, including clouded leopard, which has been seen around near Bompu camp. In fact, most of these cats that I'm just about to show you have been seen in that area. If you're really lucky on the road as you're going up and down in your Jeep. Here's the marbled cat. These are all sort of small, medium-sized cats. Asian golden cat. This is very rarely seen, but there are records again around Bompu. Leopard cat, which is probably the most regular of these, but it's tough to see any of these at Eagle Nest. And phew, we've been through Eagle Nest, seen a heck of a lot of birds. It's time for a rice beer. So this is a lady who's making rice beer, which you'll find is very widely drunk in these areas. So it's made from rice, which is roasted till it's completely black, and then it's fermented, but not with yeast. It's fermented with some local medicinal plants and rice flour. And eventually, after that ferments for a few weeks, it's mixed with water and usually drunk in a bamboo mug, through a bamboo straw as well. It's not too strong, but after a few of them, you might struggle to get up early the next morning. But it's well worth trying some rice beer when you're in Arunachal. So that was the main bit of Eagle Nest. Typically, we probably on a tour would stay in Eagle Nest for 6 or 7 days. It's that fantastic, and based at the 2 camps. Nearby is the Sancti Valley. So if we continue further north, and we're heading up on that road to Twang and eventually to Tibet if we kept going there. Sancti Valley is a nice river valley with mountains, and it's quite popular for a few special species. In the winter, if you come to Eagle Nest in the winter, they have black-necked crane, which winters here, but they tend to have gone, I think, by mid-February. But there are a few other good birds. The winterers here. This is the typical view of Sancti Valley. It's this wide valley, these shingle-lined rivers, which is perfect for ibisbill. So ibisbills winter here in small numbers. And another really interesting bird that is not seen in too many other places is long-billed plover. And that again winters here. But interestingly, just a few years ago, it was found to breed as well. I think it wasn't known to breed in India at all, breeding in China, probably 1,500 kilometers or more away. And a pair was noticed by one group breeding, and then it's been recorded in other years breeding here as well. So it's quite remarkable. It's not so high altitude. It's far from the other breeding areas, but if you go later, so you go in May maybe, there is still a good chance of finding long-billed plover around, and it might be breeding. Black-tailed crake is another key bird from the Sancti Valley and a few other sites around. Again, typical crake is quite difficult to see, but there's quite a few places around where you can get them on the edge of habitation, the edge of fields, as well as in really marshy areas. This valley is quite good for finches and buntings, grey-headed bullfinch. Little bunting is a reasonably common winterer in a lot of this area of the northeast. And then if we continue up, we're continuing a bit further north. This is a really interesting area. From the town of Dirang, you can head up the Mandala Road. And so this is a road that starts at about 1,500 meters, goes up through slightly more open forest than Eagle Nest, but it goes up to a pass at about 3,000 meters. And this is through a lot of oak and conifer. Unfortunately, a lot of deforestation has happened here, but it's a slightly different habitat and it's a bit more open, so you can see things a bit more easily, and it is some fantastic birding. Not that well explored compared to Eagle Nest. This is the view of the Himalayas you get from this area. So you have these sort of open grassy hillsides here, which you don't really have in Eagle Nest. This is when you've come out of the main forest. So this is going up to sort of 2,500 to 3,000 meters. You can peer down here and see what you can see on these slopes. Himalayan cuckoo is fairly commonly heard around here. Actually, I think these cuckoos are much more difficult to identify than the books tend to suggest. People say look at the width of the barring on the underparts, but they're really very difficult. So common cuckoo and lesser cuckoo, both are actually extremely similar. But thankfully the calls are quite different. So again, it's a common sound if you're coming in April and May. Yellow-billed blue magpies are up at this altitude. You don't get red-billed in this part of eastern India. They just occur further west. Darjeeling woodpecker is a reasonably large pied woodpecker that occurs in these forests at slightly higher altitude. Spotted laughing thrush is a very nice one. Again, this is quite a large bird, but quite unobtrusive, quite difficult to see often. Bhutan laughing thrush, as its name would suggest, is found throughout most of Bhutan and not much outside of that. So this is really the only area outside of Bhutan. It just barely makes it to here. So we're just across the eastern border of Bhutan. Streak-throated barwings. This is another barwing that we have. These again, we also have in this area, we saw the rusty-fronted, we have hoary-throated barwing. And interesting, there's multiple subspecies of streak-throated. This one that you get here is incredibly similar to hoary-throated. It has this quite grey throat with a few streaks on it. And it actually is known to hybridize, so might potentially not be a good species on its own. I think further east and south in Arunachal, streak-throated barwing is a little more distinct. Green striped babbler, quite reliable area to see them. And Russet bush warbler. I've never seen one this prominent. They're really, again, difficult to see, but quite easy to hear if you're there at the right time. They have a very distinctive buzzy song. It's quite an interesting bird. It was not much known about it because it was overlooked as a subspecies of brown bush warbler for many years. In fact, I don't think it's covered by Salim Ali in the handbook, for example. It wasn't really noticed then. He's actually quite different, but not a lot is historically known about it. And Hume's bush warbler, which is fairly scarce here. Rufous-fronted bush tit is a particularly smart bird, a bush tit, meaning the same family as the long-tailed tit you have in Europe, Igithalos. In eastern Arunachal, right at the very, very extreme of eastern Arunachal on the China border, you have black-browed tit, which has been split by the IOC, but not recognized by eBird and Clements yet. So there's one species in eBird you find, which is rufous-fronted or black-browed bush tit, but the two are probably separate species. Crimson-browed finch is a smart bird. The females are yellow. Females look quite different. A really nice one, the gold-naped finch. We have crossbills in this part of India. As I'm sure most people know, they're highly adapted with the bill with the mandibles crossing to feed on conifer seeds, which they tend to hold the cone with one foot and use their mandibles to push the scales apart and get to the seeds inside. So there are lots of different types of crossbills across the world that have different calls. A lot of them very specialized to one particular conifer species. So it's a complicated bunch. What we have in India here, a fairly small build compared to many crossbills, but I don't know that we have very good recordings. So if you're ever up here, it's worth getting some good recordings of the call. And another nice finches you get up here, red-headed bullfinch. They're often mixed with grey-headed bullfinch. It's a bird that I remember very fondly because at Lama Camp, the last time I was there, this was my 1000th species in India. So a familiar one for our European birders, goldcrest, which is a high altitude bird in India, but in similar habitat in conifers. It apparently sounds slightly different, a bit different to European birds, and could be that the Asian birds are a different species. And another familiar European bird, the Eurasian wren, the commonest bird in Britain, but they don't really look very much like this one. There's a huge variation in wrens from around the world and across Europe and Asia. This one is we get very brown birds here and quite a long bill on the wrens you have here. And this particular bird, we're back to our Pheloscopus warblers. I've been saving you from Pheloscopus warblers fairly well. But at Mandala, this is a buff-throated warbler. Now, buff-throated warbler was only known in India from 2 specimens until April 2018, when a group I was with found 2 or 3 birds here in Mandala that we thought couldn't be Tickle's leaf warblers, which they tend to be very confused with. They just didn't look right for Tickles. We heard them singing a little bit as well, and were fairly sure that they were definitely not Tickles and therefore could have been buff-throated. But after some research, we were back home looking into them. We were happy they were buff-throated, and that prompted various people to investigate and, of course, check photos. And actually, plenty of photos of buff-throated warbler turned up from this same area in particular for 3 or 4 years before our sighting. So that was the first live sighting in India, but it prompted several records to be uncovered. So it's probably well, it clearly is overlooked. It's probably present in some of the other areas around here. And if you're really lucky, some good mammals up here as well. Asiatic black bear, or the Himalayan subspecies of Asiatic black bear does occur here. And red panda, which we saw on our last trip, which was fantastic. This was at Mandala, but it can also be seen in the eagle nest sometimes. So having done a day, unfortunately often that's all it is, but it's worth 2 or 3 days along the Mandala Road. One place we always visit if we go to eagle nest is Sela Pass, which we should actually call Sela because La means pass. So otherwise it's the say pass. So this is the road that goes up to Twang. There's no vegetation. You're above the tree line. It's usually snow covered throughout the year, and it has a few special birds. The road is usually passable through the year, but it can be quite tricky. This is where you get to if you get up to Sela Pass. This is a gate, which is actually the boundary between 2 districts. So you go down a bit more and Twang on your left, and to the right is where you've come up from Eagle Nest. But as I say, it can be quite difficult traveling in this part of the world. These roads that run through the valley, steep-sided, especially after the monsoons, there are a lot of landslides, and you can find road blockages here. So how they manage to clear them so quickly is quite remarkable, but you'll quite often find you're interrupted by a landslide such as this. But when I could convince him to stop looking through my scope, he got back to work and they cleared the road within a few minutes here. And this is what Sela Pass is like. This is one of the high altitude lakes here. It's a fantastic habitat, really nice place. So you're up over 4,000 meters, just over 4,000 meters. And one of the birds you get here with the duck is the Himalayan monal. This superbly colored bird. This is Himalayan monal. You can actually get Slater's monal as well, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Blood pheasant. Small flocks of blood pheasant are possible from the road and looking down over the sides here. Up in the way of raptors, bearded vulture is a possibility. This is actually the seen here occasionally, but not often. This is the most easterly record in India of bearded vulture, I think. Snow pigeons, see, small flocks of these flying around. And chuffs. These are red-billed chuffs. We don't get yellow-billed this far east. So the same chuff that you get in Britain, for example. And here is one key target you're looking for. These are grandalas. Grandalas are an amazing bird. It's a thrush-like bird, somewhat between a thrush and a starling. They have those pointed wings and look like starlings in flight. And they also swarm somewhat like starlings. So you usually get to see them at Sela Pass. Don't quite get the large swarms here that you get in some other parts of India. So there are places where you can get hundreds or even thousands in the flocks, but it's a good bird that you can often see around Sela Pass. The stunning colour on the male. This is a pair feeding on sea buckthorn berries. Black-faced laughing thrush is a commoner one that doesn't skulk quite so much, usually fairly easily seen. Rufous-vented hyenas in quite big flocks in this area. And one specialist is rufous-breasted bush robin, which again, if you're coming to Sela Pass in sort of April, May time, a lot of these birds are singing and show quite prominently. So it's a stunning coloured bird. And a few different rosefinches up here. This is dark-rumped rosefinch. This one is Himalayan beautiful rosefinch. So this is a bird which was split, again, not too long ago, a few years ago. So beautiful rosefinch was split into the Himalayan one and the Chinese beautiful rosefinch. So this is Himalayan in western Arunachal. Chinese was thought possibly does occur in Arunachal. So when I was actually looking at these pictures earlier today, I thought, I don't actually know how to identify Chinese beautiful rosefinch. So I thought I'd look it up. And I looked at this particular bird, and Chinese is supposed to have not quite such a small bill as Himalayan. It has quite a broad supercilium, and it has no streaking on the flanks. So I looked at this bird and thought, yeah, it looks a bit like a Chinese. I don't think it is. It was taken in Sikkim, which is a little bit less likely than Arunachal. This photo was taken there. So I think it probably is Himalayan, but I need to have another look at that one. So Chinese beautiful rosefinch hasn't been confirmed in India yet. White-throated dipper, the British dipper, or a different race of it, obviously, but white-throated dipper here is a very high altitude bird. So you get brown dipper as well, which is usually a bit lower down. White-throated dipper is more of the alpine habitats. And here's another bird we're always looking for in the little marshes around the Sailor Pass. This is solitary snipe, which is only a winterer here. It's never been found breeding in India, but it's wintering here at high altitude on some of these small marshes here. This is white-winged grosbeak. Not a very easy bird to see. Tibetan blackbird. This is extremely similar to the European blackbird. It has much less of an eye ring. So in fact, this one seems more prominent than most, but it has almost no obvious yellow orbital ring. And other thrushes you have here. So Alpine Thrush. This is one you might know as plain-backed thrush. So very recently, about 10 or so years ago, Per Alstrom and Shashank Dalvi, a very well-known Indian birder, were doing some study near Sailor Pass on thrushes and other birds, and they realized that these thrushes that they were hearing seemed to have different songs. The plain-backed thrush that they were hearing in the forests seemed quite musical, but the birds that were higher up above the tree line, such as near Sailor Pass here, were a bit more scratchy and unmusical sound. They look very similar. There are a few differences, but after various studies they've done, they've realized that they were actually two separate species. So there was a new species described, which is Himalayan forest thrush. And there is Himalayan forest thrush. Still not a lot known about where exactly they are. The forest thrush is a bit lower down where it breeds, because it's breeding in the forests. The Alpine thrush, as the other subspecies are now called, it's been split, is a higher altitude above the tree line, typically breeding. But they both seem to winter in more or less the same area. The Himalayan forest thrush on this one is quite short-tailed, a bit short-legged. It's quite a little darker here, but the face pattern is subtly different. But it's also more of a skulker, I think. So if you get a chance to go to Eagle Nest, you have to check every thrush you can. We saw on my last trip, when we were a little bit lower down and thought we had a good chance of Himalayan forest thrush. Unfortunately, we only saw alpines there, but they would have been in the same area that Himalayan forest thrush is presumably wintering. Okay, so that is the main sites in Western Arunachal. So that was doing Eagle Nest and the higher areas around there. So the other main birding area that's now done is the Mishmi Hills, which we're right over now on the eastern side of Arunachal. So again, up the river valley, this case up the Dibang River. Again, it's quite a large altitudinal range you can go from a road. So the diversity of birds is good, and the access is reasonably good. It's also a very tribal area. Unfortunately, there has been quite a lot of hunting here. If you travel around, you'll almost definitely see kids, boys carrying slingshots. And a part of that is that the birding can be quite tough in places, as the birds are not necessarily, they're a bit more secretive than they might be otherwise. But there are a few key birds here to try and find. This is sort of landscape fairly high up. Again, probably this is about 2,000 meters or so. And here's a fairly motley crew of birders from a few years ago. This is the highest point of Mishmi, the Meodia Pass, and quite a lot of the good birds are found very close to this point. So this is 2,600 meters, as it says. I thought I'd drop in another flock. We haven't seen any for a while. This is actually quite an obvious one, and it's one of the commonest ones. This is Blythe's leaf warbler. And yellow-throated fulvetta, another of the fulvettas that is in Arunachal. It can be quite common in places. It's quite difficult to see outside of Arunachal, and it moves around in these really fast and quite noisy flocks. Some of the open areas here can be quite good for various other birds. Chestnut bunting is fairly rare in northeast India. And now we're back for wedge-billed babblers again. So we saw Sikkim wedge-billed babbler at Eagle Nest. This is Kacha wedge-billed babbler, alternatively known as chevron-breasted babbler. Can't see it quite so clearly from here. You can see a little bit just below the eye and below the bill and the breast. It has these bold white sort of arrow chevron marks. The Sikkim one is also known as blackish-breasted babbler. It's a lot plainer and darker on the breast. Similar behaviour. They can be in small groups, not very easy to see. In fact, if you read Pamela Rasmussen's book, Birds of South Asia, you find that these are not actually supposed to be here. It's thought that Sikkim wedge-billed babbler is the one that occurs here, but records would suggest otherwise. Kacha is the one that's seen here. I don't think Sikkim has been recorded. Here's another nice bird to try and find. Rather a unique Renbabbler, long-billed Renbabbler. It really does look like a small kiwi. But here's the one you really want to see if you come to the Mishmi Hills. This is Mishmi Renbabler, also boringly called rusty-throated Renbabbler. So Mishmi Renbabler was only known from one specimen that Salim Ali collected on an expedition in 1947 and hadn't been seen since. Now, of course, part of that is not surprising. This area was off limits. Even Indians needed to go through a process to get a permit to visit here, so there weren't many people looking. But when it did open up, Ben King came with a group, and one of their main objectives was to try to re-find Mishmi Renbabler. This was in the early 2000s. And they came up here and they played the call of rufous-throated Renbabler, which is a pretty similar looking species, occurs more widely to the west especially. And they found it. They responded quite easily, and they found several birds on that trip. And so since then, this is fairly reliably seen on Mishmi Hills near Meodia Pass, before you get there and down the other side. So you have a good chance of seeing this. But again, like any wren babblers, they're not easy. So none of these things are guaranteed, unfortunately. But here's another bird that's really a key one to look out for. This is Blythe's tragopan. So tragopans, these pheasants, you can find at Eagle Nest as well. We have Blythe's tragopan, which you can hear quite often, but don't often see. And Temminck's tragopan also occurs there. Blythe's tragopan occurs around Mishmi, but it's really difficult to see. So when I was last there, I've never seen one, unfortunately, but we were trying quite hard for this bird, and we'd heard it a couple of times, including quite close to the place where we were staying at Mishmi Hills. And we had no luck. We heard from a group who'd seen one along the road, just very close to where we were staying. And then our driver went chatting around to some people, and he told us later in the evening that right opposite where we were staying, where there was a camp with some migrant labourers who were there to sort of work on the roads in that area, they had had a Blythe's tragopan. But when I say had it, I mean they'd had it for lunch. So they'd caught and cooked Blythe's tragopan about 100 meters from where we were staying. So unfortunately, that is quite a problem. It's not so much maybe the people who live there, but some of the migrant labourers that come in from Nepal and other parts of India. So hunting is unfortunately quite common. We apparently heard that the next day they had a hill partridge for lunch. But this is another of the key pheasants to look for here. This is Slater's monal. I mentioned this earlier for Sailor Pass. This is it's a tough bird to see. It's seen a little bit more often in the autumn. There were lots of people who had some good sightings last November from the Mayodia Pass area. What's interesting is there are birds that's so scarce in India and only really occurs in this part of Arunachal, is that you actually have two different subspecies. There's the one at Sailor Pass in Western Arunachal is different to the eastern one. Unfortunately, I am here showing the Western one, not the one that actually occurs in Mishmi Hills. But the all-white tail, or nearly all-white tail, is the Western mono. And then the one that occurs here has a sort of orange band that goes across it. But a really interesting bird, Slater's mono. Himalayan owl is quite like European tawny owl, a little bit darker, a little bit bolder, more boldly marked, but it's also strictly nocturnal, so it's quite difficult to see. It does occur in Western Himalayas as well. It's probably quite widespread, but being entirely nocturnal is not an easy one. And also, if you're wandering around at night, Hodgson's frogmouth is, again, pretty scarce around in the Eastern Himalayas. The chance of it here. A few good mammals at Mishmi as well. We talked a little bit about hoolock gibbons when we were doing Assam a couple of weeks ago. This is the Western hoolock gibbon, but it's actually a newly discovered subspecies known as Mishmi hoolock gibbon. So you have two subspecies of Western, and you do have Eastern in parts of Arunachal as well. Something you are likely to see when you're traveling around this part of the world is a mitten. So a mitten is a cross between a gaur, a wild gaur, the largest cow there is, and a domestic cattle. So these are not wild; they roam around, but they're actually owned by locals. And ownership of mittens is quite a status symbol. So your status can be determined by how many mittens you happen to own. So they're quite valued. They are used in ritual sacrifice as well in this area by the tribes. Much less likely to see is this somewhat bizarre animal, the takin, Mishmi takin. So it's described as a goat antelope. It's related to sheep more than anything else, but it's big, it's large and heavy. They graze around in herds. Not very well known in India at all. So that was Mishmi. Got some more treats in Arunachal. So the last place we'll visit today is Namdapha National Park. So now we're coming east and south a bit, close to the Myanmar border. Namdapha National Park, it says it's seldom visited due to the difficulty of access. Well, I think it's less that it's seldom visited. Actually, you can visit it, but there's huge areas of the park that you just cannot get to. So access inside is quite difficult. It's very mountainous. There's lots of rivers. It covers, again, an enormous altitudinal range, and that makes it unique in the world because it actually has all four big cats from this area. So tiger, leopard, snow leopard, and clouded leopard are all present here, but your chances of seeing any one of them are pretty much nil, unfortunately. But there are a lot of very good birds, and it's a fantastic landscape. So this is Namdapha. As you can see, the darker green area is the bits that you can actually really access, and you have to do this by trekking and then camping. There's a couple of permanent camps set up, but you need a fair bit of time. You ideally need a week through Namdapha to cross some of these rivers and bird around here. But again, the forest is superb. This is a typical landscape. So you have these wide rivers to cross in places, and then thick forest. And the easier rivers to cross have a bridge for you. And here is one really key bird for Namdapha. Not very easy to see, but they winter here and they do breed as well. But white-bellied heron is critically endangered. Most of them are found in Bhutan. There aren't too many outside of Bhutan. There's probably just about 200 left in the wild. The big heron, I think it's second only to Goliath heron in size. And there was a survey done through Arunachal just 2 or 3 years ago checking lots of rivers in eastern North Arunachal, and they only found white-bellied heron in 3 sites. So it really is scarce and threatened and not easy to see. A little bit easier to see is pied falconet, tiny falcon. You find here also Mimeri that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. It was a good place for them, but this is quite reliable here. And red-headed trogon, a real stunner, a lowland trogon, unlike the Ward's trogon we saw earlier. Namdapha, probably the best place to see it in India. Blue-naped pitta, large pitta, also found at Kaziranga if you're lucky, possibly more easy here. Brown hornbills that we talked about when we were talking about Dihing Patkai as being a main site. There are basically 2 main sites for them in India. So it's Dihing Patkai in Assam and Namdapha. And wreathed hornbill, which is quite common. You see large flocks of these. Large nil tava, it's the largest flycatcher in India. White-throated bulbul, it's quite a big bulbul. It behaves a little bit like a laughing thrush. They fly around in small flocks, moving like laughing thrushes. A rather stunning warbler is rufous-faced warbler. And tisias. We've done lots of small skulking birds. We hadn't done any tisias until now. This is slaty-bellied, which is has the most restricted range of all the tisias. Greater necklace laughing thrush can be found in big flocks sometimes, and also mixed with lesser necklace laughing thrush. Rufous-backed sibia is quite uncommon generally in India. And streaked Renbabbler, quite a distinctive one. There's large head, no supercilium, quite large bill. This is quite a restricted range, so mostly found in eastern Arunachal and Nagaland. White-hooded babbler is a very smart one. These are found in bamboo, at quite low elevations. They're a bit more widespread, so even at Kaziranga, somewhere like that, you can find them. Usually in small flocks, and can be quite obvious with a bit of luck. And here is another real key bird for Namdapha, snowy-throated babbler, very distinctive babbler. It has a tiny range. It's almost endemic to India, only really occurs in this area of Arunachal, just across the border into Myanmar. I guess probably if you're going to Namdapha alongside the white-bellied heron, this is the bird you really want to see. A lot more to offer than birds. We mentioned the mammals in Namdapha. It's actually one of the best places in India for butterflies, which I really can't go into tonight. There's far too much to look at, but there's a huge selection. The Eastern Himalayas in general is super for butterflies, and really not that well researched. Himalayan sun bear, not very likely to see it, unfortunately, but I think this is possibly the only place in India that you can see, you could see Himalayan sun bear. And if you're doing a trip at night in particular, there is a few species of flying squirrels. So Namdapha flying squirrel is an endemic. It's actually only known from one specimen that was captured. I think it was hunted and captured in 1981. Not been seen since. This photo is from Dritterman, who's probably India's most famous wildlife photographer. He's done some amazing expeditions and got some incredible shots of all sorts of obscure species. So you'll find this picture very widely spread on the internet as Namdapha flying squirrel. Unfortunately, it was re-identified somewhat after it had been published, and actually is a red giant squirrel. But obviously the internet takes a while to catch up, so you'll find this referred to as Namdapha flying squirrel. but Namdapha flying squirrel is still only known from the one specimen. So it still needs to be rediscovered. Maybe that's what's there for your trip to Namdapha. Thank you very much, and thank you to all the fantastic photographers on this trip.
What a brilliant presentation, Mike.
Oh,
and
fantastic.
I think the success of this this webinar goes to the photographers who've contributed to, for the slideshow, and then also, Salil, who's set up many nights to put this together with you, and wonderful, absolutely fantastic presentation. It was worth.
I think this demonstrates what a fantastic area the Eastern Himalayas is as well, because we get a lot of birds in there, a lot of variety, but there's so much missed out as well. I only just realized I didn't put in a cutia. I can't believe I missed Himalayan cutia. It's one of the best birds.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. So I think Mike, I also want to show my gratitude to everyone who's been involved with, whether it's been a community or it's a lodge operator or a tour operator, or foreign tour operator from overseas, researchers, guides, photographers, birders. I mean, it's a very, very big machine to put together to be able to acknowledge the wealth of wildlife and birds that the Northeast has, and to be able to do something about it so that there's sustainability, and there's for future to see that it stays intact. So it's really important. And then there've been people from Sherdukupin tribe, Anupasang, who has a camp in Bompo, and she's the one who's managed to kept it going and energize, sensitize all the people there from her tribe. And there's Indi Babu, Indi Globe from Lama Camp, and then there's Benuda, from of course Tropazam, but he's been an old hand at saving these places, talking about them. And then there have been people like Bully, so Bully is right here, and I just want to quickly call him online to just quickly chat with us, and then sort of so Bully, just go ahead and press this hand. There's a hand here, and it will I will allow you in to come on board and then speak to the audience for a couple of minutes, so they know who you are. You have been conducting trips there, bird watching trips, and you've been catering to bird watchers, and you've been putting in a lot of effort to keep things alive for people who come there, sorting out their permits, taking them around, making sure the food is great and accommodations fine, and their health and happiness and all of that, And some of the key guides are also involved with all this. Of course, I can go on talking about it, but it's so important to acknowledge the entire machinery that has been put together, which and they form the strongest of nuts and bolts of this machinery. So while he comes, let me check if he's around.
Some of the questions was there was one good one
about
are there many leeches in this area, and I thought that's quite a good question, because yes, if you go in monsoon time, which actually it's a fantastic place for snakes, for amphibians, all sorts of interesting studies being done then. So yes, then there would be quite a lot. In the other times I've been there, which is all between March and May, I think I'm the only person who ever got a leech bite out of the people I've been with at that time of year. So thankfully, the main times we go birding, there aren't there.
So friends, if you've got more questions, just go on posting in the chat so that Mike can continue to talk to you for a...
Steve Lister tried to get there and failed a few years ago. Come again, Steve. So unfortunately, this is one I had a trip planned with a few people from the UK who were booked to do this March last year. And of course, that was the one that got cancelled because of lockdown. They all rebooked to go at the same time in March, early April this year. And of course, that was not going to happen either. So we're hoping they manage to get their third time lucky next year.
So, Mike, you'd be, this is a great time to travel around. So, if there are people who are interested who are in India and they want to do a tour with you, why don't you take them to Assam or to Sikkim or to Arunachal in the next couple of months?
I would love to do a trip there. March,
Yeah.
anytime. I think Sananda said she was supposed to have been there in April last year. Yeah, I might have seen you then, Sananda. I was as well, but come again. We'll go next month.
Excellent. So Dominic has a question. Says approximately how many bird species are likely in a 2 to 3 week trip?
Yeah, it's, sort of between 400. It depends partly where you do, but I mean, if you typically do Kaziranga as well, which is a real big diversity in the lowlands, then 400 is probably quite doable. I've done. I know I did one trip which was a full 4-week trip, and we managed 500 in that time. But yeah, it's a fantastic variety especially if you include one or two slightly other places like Kaziranga or one or two other lowland places.
Yeah. So Sumit is asking, is Namdapha accessible? Yes, Sumit, it is accessible, but we'll get to know the latest, when it all sort of opens up. Yes, there's a place to stay. You can stay at Devan and you can also stay at Miao. And there are other places when you go and camp inside, you have to camp, when you're going when you go across the river. And, so there are lots of choices there. Yeah, go ahead, Mike. There's another question for you.
Another question there?
Was hoping of mention of the Great Britain. Saw an individual in Changlang, which is not far from now.
A Great Britain is really quite unusual in India, and there's a few in north and northwest most winters around the Delhi area and places, but I've never heard of a northeast India Great Britain. I guess it's not that unlikely. There's some big areas in the Brahmaputra with lots of sort of large, extensive reed beds, so it's possible. But it's a rare bird in India. So yeah, that's a Namdapha. So right on the eastern edge of India. Good record. So
Jigan has a complaint here. He says your British accent is difficult to understand. And by the way, Jigan bhai, do you know that Mike is pretty fluent in Hindi? And he. Mike, you may not want to try that right now. Yeah. So, Bully, if you can hear me, just come on board. I'm still waiting for you. You need to press that hand thing and then request to speak. Let me find you, and then So you go and let me just find Bully if you can come online. I really like to.
So the people, the people you're talking about, Bully, and the other people who run these camps, all the people at Bompu, it's been brilliant that they've been shown that ecotourism is a viable business. Eagle Nest has been quite popular over the last few years. Certainly in March, April, they fill up their capacity. They don't have a huge capacity because you don't want too many people there. But for that period, they can be full. And it's shown people that they have a viable income. And of course, these are people who in the last year, now it looks like this year, have basically lost 2 seasons of income pretty much. We can travel in India, so there's a few Indians traveling, but it's not as many as it would have been normally. Last year, no one was traveling at all, so they missed pretty much the entire season. I think there's a few people who were traveling in early March, but they missed the main bit of the season completely.
Yes, absolutely. And how it sort of filters down the income, the happiness, the tourists, the entire ecotourism setup, as I'd call it, that this is something which is far more sustainable as an industry than timber logging or bringing bamboo out or ruining the landscapes, And if we can sort of just sustain it with more tourism, then everybody will be happy. There will be less of, whatever problems that this area face. And, because of tourism, it sort of all dies out, It sort of becomes all nice and happy and a great place to be in. Mm-hmm. I just want to quickly tell people, there were people asking me that, what do we do? So, this year it's been the year of rural tourism, and I've taken upon myself at Asian Adventures to empower local communities, to talk about them, and to hold these webinars where I can bring out these opportunities for communities, rural people, and discuss their issues, and then or showcase their strengths and places, so that people will acknowledge them, and then they'll be able to travel to these places and make friends for life. This is what I'm doing currently. When we started to do these lodges years ago in Gir or in Pangot or any of these places, the idea was to spread the ethos of bird tourism, to bring people to acknowledge that it's not just safari oriented tourism. There is a lot more than that, which you can just do on foot, with a pair of binoculars hanging around your neck, a little notebook and a bird book, and you're good to go. So the most sustainable sort of tourism. And I think nobody's ever going to achieve it fully, but at least we've carved the way. So that's been, but it couldn't have been done, all by myself. There are people like Mike. You remember you used to stand with me at the bird fair, trying to convince people that Mohit is a good guy to go with.
2005 was the last time I was there. I've been here all the time.
Yeah. Okay, great. So next one is to Goa. We're going to.
One interesting question, actually. I'm just going to. I see Gary asked a good question there about how long.
Sorry.
How long would you recommend visiting for to maximise the number of species, and what time of year? And it's good. I think more or less the way we went through this session, doing Eagle Nest up to the Sela Pass, Mandala Road, but coupled with Kaziranga in the lowlands is a really popular itinerary. And as I was sort of saying with Dominic, that's sort of the widest variety of species that can just about be done in 2 weeks. So if you've got the sort of 2 weekends, 16, 17 days probably is what we'd normally say for that. And then Mishmi Hills often gets extended for 4 or 5 days or more to add to the end of that. I've actually just been chatting to someone for a trip for next year, who is actually he's going to Bhutan. So that's different. He's going to Bhutan for a couple of weeks. He's going to then do Kaziranga, Eagle Nest and places, and then he was going to go to Mishmi Hills and Namdapha. So we've just been looking at Mishmi Hills and Namdapha bit to add on to that. So he's doing everything in. I think he's doing three months altogether. But yeah, it's about roughly 2 weeks or so for the main Kaziranga, Eagle Nest. And then if you've got 3 weeks, then you can nice and comfortably add Mishmi and some other places as well.
Great. So friends, next Thursday we'll see you here again, for a virtual journey to Goa. And Goa will be immense amount of fun because,
it'll also be less hectic than this and more relaxing, because Goa just is a relaxing place.
Correct. And then connect with us for our webinars and sign up on social media. Farin, can you just put the link, please, so that everybody can sort of sign up for future webinars. Tomorrow we are going to take you to Cambodia. We've got person Sansikol from Cambodia Bird Guide Association. So tomorrow evening, same time, 7:30, we'll be taking you to Cambodia for bird watching and a bit of culture, like always. And then next Thursday, we are going to be back here again. Great. Anything else, Mike, that you'd like to say?
I don't think so. Have you got a file you were going to share on this? I think we were going to do something.
Sorry. Yeah, good you reminded me. It's birds of Arunachal Pradesh. I've shared a file. Please download it, and it's got all that information that Mike was talking about. It's all the text that you may want to use it in the future as your repository. So that's fantastic. And so love you all, and then we'll see you again next week. Have fun. And tomorrow, if you've got time, do join us for Cambodia. That's going to be another magic, because Sansikol is fantastic in Cambodia. Mike, you and I are going to do a trip in November to Cambodia. So we'd have to join us.
Super.
Great. Thanks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Namaste. Bye, everyone.